Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
On November 30th, 1903, Otto Frank, a rancher near Meeteetse, Wyoming, is found dead next to a barbed wire fence on his property, his shotgun still leaning against it. An accident? Foul play? No one knows for sure. In 1966, photographer Charles Belden dies of an apparent suicide in his Florida darkroom, a small caliber pistol by his side. The two deaths are separated by some 63 years and 2,000 miles, but connected to an extraordinary place, the Pitchfork Ranch.
You take your troubles with you, but maybe I can feel brand new again. Oh, cross the line.
Count Otto Frank von Liechtenstein was a member of the German royal family. He first came to the Bighorn Basin in northwest Wyoming on a hunting trip in 1877, but he was also looking for land on which he could establish a cattle ranch. He eventually found what he was looking for, a large expanse of land along the upper Grable River, where he built a stucco house. Within 6 years, Otto Frank became a successful rancher, running close to 15,000 head of cattle. They all wore his brand, simple, easy to read, a pitchfork. After Otto Frank's death in 1903, the pitchfork was sold to Lewis Graham Phelps, a wealthy Montana businessman. Phelps had purchased the nearby Z-Bar-T Ranch in 1901, and in addition to the pitchfork, accumulated other local properties, increasing his holdings to 250,000 acres. In 1904, he moved his wife, Annis, his son, Eugene, and his daughter, Frances, to the Pitchfork. This ranching family would eventually play an important role in the life of Charles Belden. Charles Josiah Belden was born to a wealthy California family on November 26, 1887. He grew up in the town of Ross, just north of San Francisco in Marin County. Charles was a bright, inquisitive student. After graduating high school in Ross, he attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, beginning in the fall of 1906, where he studied engineering. It was at MIT that Charles met someone who would become a lifelong friend.
Charlie had gone to MIT, and my uncle Eugene Phelps went to MIT, and they met and became friends and formed a very strong relationship as friends.
In July and August of 1909, Charles, Eugene, and another college friend sailed to Europe for a summer abroad. This would be no ordinary tourist vacation, however, but a motoring expedition of the continent, for accompanying them in the ship's hold was a 1908 Packard touring car. Arriving in Hamburg, Germany, Charles immediately bought a good camera, a Zeiss Minimum Palmos, that used 4x5 glass plates to capture images. It was a decision that would propel him to celebrity status in the coming years. Recently introduced, the Zeiss Minimum Palmos was a unique camera for the time. It was small enough to be portable, rugged enough to withstand the harsh conditions of traveling, and fast enough to capture action. In Europe, the group visited destinations in England, Germany, France, Switzerland, and Italy, motoring across the continent in the Packard, Charles snapping away. Returning to Germany, the adventurous threesome found they still had some holiday time left, so they decided to make one more loop. They decided to go to Russia. From Germany to St. Petersburg, on to Moscow, and back through Warsaw, Poland, It was the first American touring car to make a pleasure trip through Russia. Rarely did any Americans visit Russia during this turbulent time of waning Tsarist rule, which just 8 years later would fall in the Russian Revolution. Back from Europe, Charles and Eugene graduated with engineering degrees from MIT in 1910. Eugene headed back to the Pitchfork, and Charles to San Francisco, where he went to work in a small engine factory. During his time off, Charles traveled to Wyoming to visit his friend Eugene Phelps. There, he met the entire Phelps family, including Eugene's sister, Frances. He quickly fell in love, both with Frances and the Upper Graybull country.
This ranch is probably one of the most unusual properties in the West from both a scenic and practical stock raising standpoint. Most of the ranch lies in a basin at the head of the Graybull River at an altitude of 7,000 feet and is surrounded on 3 sides by the majestic peaks of the Rockies, rising 12 and 13,000 feet above the sea. It's a veritable photographer's paradise.
On February 1st, 1913, Charles married Frances in San Francisco. After the honeymoon, he went back to work at the engine factory. But both he and Frances had other dreams. In 1914, the couple returned to the Pitchfork, where Charles began to learn the ranching business from his father-in-law, L.G. Phelps. At first, he had to prove himself to the rough and ready cowboys, but eventually he was accepted, as he demonstrated a real interest in the ranching business and a true compassion for their lives and their work. In 1922, L.G. Phelps died suddenly. Charles and Eugene became co-owners of the ranch. Eugene took over farming and construction duties while Charles managed the livestock and business contacts. But when it came down to it, Charles was not very good at ranch management, and neither was Eugene.
Charlie spent all of his time taking pictures, using that technology. Eugene spent all of his time doing engineering.
I set about to secure as complete a story as possible, pictorially and photographically, of the different phases and incidents of handling cattle on the range.
Belden never went riding without his trusty Zeiss Palmos on one side of his saddlebag and glass plates filling the other. Roaming the ranch on his horse Pinky, he discovered that one of the best perspectives to take pictures of ranch activities was from horseback. Pinky learned to stand stock still until the shutter clicked.
He loved being atop a horse. And he always said, if a picture doesn't tell a story, it's not worth taking.
Being limited to a half dozen or so glass plates at a time, he did not have the luxury of firing off multiple shots of the same scene in hopes of getting one good photo. He had to make each exposure count, and he did. When he wasn't riding the ranch taking pictures, he would disappear for hours in a darkroom he had set up for himself at the ranch.
It was his retreat, my Aunt Margot told me. He could just go up there and work and get lost.
Belden was becoming a master at his craft and quite the photographic entrepreneur. He understood the national appeal of the Western image and how it played into the public's romantic view of the West. So while many of his images captured the harsh ranch life of Wyoming, he also took idealized photos of cowboys and other Western subjects specifically for popular consumption. He sold these to national publications, sometimes with accompanying articles he wrote himself. Belden often took photographs of that most iconic of Western traditions, the branding process, both animal and sometimes human. He knew that successful artists were also brand managers actively engaged in developing themselves as recognizable products. And so, displaying a savvy promotion and publicity sense, he branded himself. He became Antelope Charlie Belden.
Yes, there's the Antelope Charlie logo, and he was called Antelope Charlie. I think once they started raising those antelope, and it became his passion.
Antelope numbered in the thousands on the Pitchfork and surrounding countryside. Zoos were in the market for these fleet-footed ungulates, although shipping them by rail resulted in high mortality rates. But Charlie Belden had a plan.
My grandfather saw that there was a problem with the antelope fawns being killed by coyotes and different predators. So he started this program where they would go out and capture newborn antelope. You had to get them within the first 24 hours or you'd never catch up to them. So they would go out and capture them and put them in gunny sacks to keep them from hurting themselves and take them back, and they penned them near the big house and fed them by bottle. And then when they would get big enough that they could survive on their own, then they would re-release them.
Frances Belden and daughters Annis and Margot helped with the bottle feeding. The fawns imprinted on their human mothers and followed them around the ranch like ducklings. And like ducklings, some of these antelope fawns would eventually fly. Charlie Belden became fascinated with airplanes in the 1920s as they began to appear more frequently in the Wyoming skies. He soon became friends with Bill Munday of Cody, an early accomplished aviator. Always pursuing new photographic opportunities, Belden began taking scenic shots from the cockpit. It may have been during one of these aerial outings that Belden came up with the plan for the bottle-fed antelope fawns. In 1936, Belden employed Bill Munday to fly 83 fawns to zoos in Chicago, Detroit, New York, and elsewhere.
There was like 5,000 antelope left in Wyoming. Today there's 450,000. And he was part of that conservation to restore them. And he felt like if we could ship them out of here to different zoos and different places that they'd propagate.
This adventure was a publicity bonanza for Belden. The trip was written up by the wire services and covered by the press worldwide. They even loaded one shipment on the Zeppelin Hindenburg for delivery to Germany. Although he took pictures of other subjects, it was Belden's Pitchfork photographs that would cement his legacy as a great chronicler of the American West. Belden captured the American cowboy and ranch life on the cusp of change, a transition point between the days of the free-grass open range and modern ranching. Moments caught in time between the old ways and the new.
The picture that comes to mind is the cowboy on the horse looking back over his shoulder, and here's the airplane coming down through the sky. Yeah, the old and the new blending.
Although some of his photographs may seem overly manipulated and contrived today, the best of them show a real talent for capturing the drama, the reality, and the breathtaking beauty of the American West. They bear the mark of an accomplished artist. Belden employed a number of photographic techniques to achieve these memorable images. Although he took many documentary-style photos, sometimes Belden found it necessary to set up a photograph he couldn't capture in nature because of problems with light, background, or characters. After seeing a shot, he could spend hours or even days recreating it to capture every detail.
He set them up like the long trail. He made those cowboys move those cattle 5 miles out of the way just to make that happen. Or the coyote. You see the coyote howling. Sucker was stuffed, dead as a post, sitting on a hill howling. He did lots of stuff like that.
Belden often used the technique of framing in his photographs. This effect draws the viewer into what would otherwise be a fairly average scene. Lighting in the early years of photography was difficult without light meters or flashbulbs. But when flashbulbs first appeared in the 1930s, Belden used them to great effect. Belden was also a master of composition. Sheep fan draws attention to design and graphics. From another angle, this photograph might have lost its impact. Belden also experimented with compositing, or combining different shots.
Did a lot of work with his photographs. For instance, Call Up the Range, where the bull is calling. The background is imposed into that picture.
Action photographs were a Belden specialty. He often used a telephoto lens to provide a safe distance between the camera and the furious activity portrayed.
I have noticed that the ideal shutter speed for stopping action is 1/400th of a second. This speed has the value of stopping action without freezing the subject too much, and will lend a little motion to the extremely fast-moving portions of the object without affecting the sharpness of the main body of the pictures.
During the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, Charles Belden was one of the most famous photographers in America. He hobnobbed with magazine publishers, movie stars, advertising executives, and other prominent people on both coasts. He parlayed this fame into promoting not only the Pitchfork, but the dude ranch there. The Pitchfork had been running dudes as well as cattle since 1915. After L.G. Phelps' death, Francis and Charles, in addition to their other duties, also took over as managers of the facility. With his influence and celebrity, it became one of the best-known dude ranches in Wyoming.
They really worked hard together to make that a producing, running dude ranch. And through his photography and the promotion he did of the ranch, really made it a success.
And Charlie Belden was promoting it with all these pictures and all over the world, and so yeah, they had great clientele.
Bill Mundy would fly guests from Cody over here to land on the bench above the house. And probably one of the most well-known people that came would have been Amelia Earhart.
The Beldens also entertained many other famous people. Movie stars Tim McCoy, Wallace Beery, and humorist Will Rogers all spent time at the Pitchfork Dude Ranch. Belden's own star power brought requests from advertisers to use his photos in magazine and newspaper ads, restaurant menus, annual reports, all in an attempt to market and associate their products with the popularity of Antelope Charlie Belden. He pitched Camel cigarettes. The Stetson Company named a hat after him. He was written about in syndicated newspaper columns. Charles Belden was becoming a legend.
I think one of the things that comes to mind is a letter that he received one time. It had Pitchfork, Wyoming, with a picture of this cowboy hat behind a camera. And he received it, and it made it to Ripley's Believe It or Not, that this picture actually was mailed and got to Pitchfork, Wyoming.
He embarked on a series of lecture tours, showing his photographs and even movies he had made. Appearing in full Western apparel, along with his trademark 10-gallon hat and high-heeled cowboy boots, he played up the cattleman image to the hilt, regaling audiences with tall tales of the West. Life was good. Belden's father, Charles Albert Belden, died in 1938. Charles inherited much of the large family fortune, including numerous buildings in New York City. He became known as the Cowboy millionaire. But his father's death also marked the beginning of the end of his time at the Pitchfork.
Well, things were not going well at the Pitchfork in the late 30s. The Depression really hit them.
By 1936, the Pitchfork was nearly bankrupt due to inheritance taxes, poor management, the Depression, and sheer neglect. A bank trustee was appointed to oversee the finances. During this time of turmoil, Charles and Francis had grown increasingly apart, and the family was in disagreement over almost everything. Belden was fed up with the financial state of the Pitchfork, although some of it was due to his own mismanagement.
course, at the same time, my grandmother and grandfather were not getting along very well, and eventually divorced.
Needing a clean break, and perhaps sensing a chance to begin anew, Charles Belden moved to Reddington Beach on the Gulf Coast of Florida near St. Petersburg. He was in his early 50s. He married Verna Stouffer of Lander, the former wife of Wyoming oilman Jack Steele. In Florida, he resumed his photographic career, this time as Seahorse Charlie Belden.
And then after he went to Florida, becoming Seahorse Charlie, Cowboy with his hat in the air on the back of a seahorse, was quite creative.
His reputation garnered him assignments all over Florida. But instead of photographing cattle and cowboys, Belden now photographed bathing beauties, beaches, and other Florida subjects.
He did continue to do photography, still with that cowboy image, Seahorse Charlie, and always wearing his hat and his boots, which must have been horribly hot in Florida.
In the 1950s, Belden traveled worldwide on assignments for National Geographic, Life, the Saturday Evening Post, and other magazines. But these newer photos didn't have the same artistry, the same impact as his Pitchfork masterpieces. Charlie Belden loved being a photographer. He reveled being in the limelight, the center of attention, promoting himself and the Western way of life.
And I don't know that he was egotistical about it. I don't believe, from what I've heard, he was that kind of man. I just think he did like that limelight. And also just promoting the Western life. I think it maybe became more than he ever expected. I don't know.
By his late 70s, Charles Belden's health began to fail. He could no longer take photographs or write.
And I really don't know what year that Charlie started getting ill. He had Parkinson's disease, and it was progressing. In 1966, my aunt went to see him and had called him and made arrangements to meet him later that evening. And a couple of hours later, Verna called and said Charlie has shot himself. I just found him in the studio.
I mean, I think he finally realized that it was going to be a downhill thing, and he didn't want to face that. He'd rather just not be here.
I believe that he decided, I'm just going to end it. I'm not going to do this anymore.
Charles Belden claimed he had carried his Zeiss Palmos camera 60,000 miles by horseback, 150,000 miles by plane, and 500,000 miles by auto. All told, his photos probably number in the tens of thousands, but it is the 5,000 or so glass plate negatives that are his true legacy, depicting a time of change, a time of transition on the Wyoming range.
I think he was keeping a huge record of the Old West, at least from 1900 to 1940. What is the West at that point in time? What were cowboys like? And every time he took a picture, you can just see it in their eyes. This is a cowboy. This is the cook. This is the fiddler. That's what the culture was. And he saw that to preserve it for us.
And really had a vision, I believe, for photography that was very unique for the time.
He saw things that other people couldn't see.
By photographing cowboys and cattle on the legendary Otto Frank Pitchfork Ranch, Charles Belden created some of the classic images of the American West. His best photographs still convey a sense of energy, vitality, and adventure that stir the hearts and imaginations of Western aficionados to this very day.
That he left such a legacy behind with those photographs. It's a treasure to me.